The session here is Government as Malware Authors, the Next Generation, presented by Mikko Hyppönen. So pass the floor.
Thank you and welcome. I am Mikko Hyppönen. And there's a common misconception that when companies and organizations get hacked, if they get hacked badly enough, they will fold, they will go bankrupt, or they will suffer horrible consequences and their stock value will plummet, never to recover. And this actually isn't true. I tried finding examples of companies or organizations which actually would have folded or gone bankrupt because they got hacked very badly, and there are very few examples. There are a handful of examples, but most of those are fairly small companies and special circumstances. Most large organizations recover fairly quickly. You can think about Sony with the Sony PlayStation Network breach, which had a dip in their stock value. They recovered fairly quickly. Global payments hack from 3 years ago. You look at their stock valuations, they dipped for 6 months and then they recovered. So companies tend to recover. However, in 2011, there was this one company which got hacked, which didn't recover. This company was a small integrator in the Netherlands, and they were in the business of selling certificates, like SSL certificates. This company got hacked, their network was breached by an outsider, and that outside attacker installed a piece of malware on their network, and that malware allowed the attacker remote access to their systems, including their certificate generation systems. And the attacker used that remote access to their certificate generation systems to generate dozens of certificates, including rogue, fake certificates for entities like Google.com, Mozilla.org, Skype.com, Tor, Microsoft, Yahoo, Facebook, and Twitter. The organization in question was a company called DigiNotar. And they did fold directly as a consequence of this hack. And the attacker was a governmental attacker. The attack came from Iran. And this attack, which was used to generate these rogue certificates, was used by Iranian government to monitor and find dissidents in their own country. An attack like this is doable if you control the whole network infrastructure of your country. If you are able to reroute traffic, for example, to Gmail or mail.google.com to your own server, you can intercept all Gmail traffic, except it's going to prompt you with an error message because the certificate isn't valid or it isn't signed by a root certificate. And Iran doesn't have its own CA, which would be trusted by the rest of the world. So the only way they can get a certificate, a rogue certificate signed by a root certificate, is by hacking an existing trusted CA like DigiNotar. But DigiNotar didn't fold because they were hacked. They folded because they didn't tell anyone. I believe they would still be around today if they would have played their cards right. But they tried to, well, they screwed up their recovery in many different ways, but most importantly, they didn't tell what had happened. And when it finally came out, they had lost their trust. And if you lose the only thing you're selling, then you're going to go bankrupt. And the only thing you're selling when you are a CA vendor is trust. So when we have governments like Iran hacking into foreign certificate vendors to install malware that enables them to gain remote access to do attacks like this, it makes you wonder what else is going on. And there's quite a bit of governmental activity like this going on. And it's all fairly new. This switch has been very quick. If we think about our enemies over the last 25 years that we've been fighting, for the first 10 years, 15 years, it was just the kids and hobbyists doing simple viruses and launching attacks just because they could. Then 15 years ago, they were joined by professionals, criminal gangs who realized they could actually make money with their attacks. But governmental activity has only been with us for 10 years. Malware coming from governments. The whole idea that governments, democratic Western governments, would actively be involved in writing viruses and Trojans and backdoors. The whole idea would have sounded ridiculous just a decade ago. The idea of democratic Western governments backdooring technology or using malware and Trojans against other democratic Western governments, that would have sounded like science fiction. But that's exactly where we are today. And this has all happened in 10 years. So it's an arms race. And very quickly, when you start talking about governmental malware writing, big words are thrown in, words like cyber war. It's all a cyber war, and it's of course not really a cyber war. It's actually far from that. I don't even like the whole word cyber, like most of us here probably don't either, but it's actually fairly useful for some purposes. But if you think about the change in threat landscape, there are some parallels here to the nuclear arms race. So if you will, we had the nuclear arms race for decades, and now we seem to be inside cyber arms race. But it's a different kind of a race. Nuclear weapons were only used twice in actual war. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those two detonations were only nuclear detonations we, the mankind, has ever done as an act of war. We have built tens of thousands of nuclear warheads. We've only detonated 2 as an act of war. So the power of nuclear weapons was and is in deterrence. Knowing that other countries have nuclear weapons, knowing exactly which countries have nuclear weapons. Those are the countries you don't go and mess with because they have nuclear weapons. And you know that they have nuclear weapons because they show them. They do or did test detonations, nuclear testing. And when you blow up a nuclear weapon, it's very easy for others to see that. So we know exactly that, okay, USA has weapons, Russia has weapons, China has weapons, Israel has weapons, UK, France, so on, India, Pakistan. The list is actually fairly short. And the power of nuclear weapons was in deterrence. And that's the kind of thing we don't have with cyber weapons. Yes, we can make educated guesses that, okay, United States probably has cutting-edge technology regarding cyber offensive capability. That's a fairly good guess. But what about the rest of the world? What's the capability of the Russians, of the Chinese, of Israel, of India and Pakistan? What's the capability of Vietnam? What's the capability of Sweden? Well, we don't actually know. Or we know much, much less than we know of traditional weapons. Because these kinds of arms are accessible to almost any country. In fact, they're accessible not just to countries, they're accessible to pretty much anyone. Traditional arms like nuclear weapons and aircraft carriers and fighter jets are controlled by armies. These modern cyber weapons can be used by anybody. But it's not just cyber as a weapon. When we look at governments as authors of malware, there's various kinds of uses, various useful things that malware can be used for by governments. For example, law enforcement use. And law enforcement is using malware more and more. There are at least 20, maybe 30 countries in the world which actually have passed laws on this, allowing police to infect citizens with malware during police investigations. So these are basically extensions of the rights police has always had. For example, the right to tap your phone if they suspect you to be guilty of a crime. And if you turn out to be innocent, then too bad. Those rights have been extended from traditional phone tapping to tapping of our mobile phones, collecting our mobile phone location, and tapping our internet connections. But as you know, more and more of our internet connections are encrypted. So if our local telco gets a court order from the police and just taps our connection, they won't see most of our traffic. They won't see your Gmail or Facebook or Skype traffic. Well, they will see it, but it's encrypted. And that irritates the law enforcement because they would like to see it if they are inspecting you for a crime. And one way of bypassing that encryption is to infect you. And that's where law enforcement malware comes into play. And several countries do this routinely. USA has been doing it since at least 2001. In Europe, for example, Germany and Netherlands have been doing it for quite a while. My own country, Finland, we passed a law on January 1st, making it legal for Finnish police to infect my computers if they suspect me for a serious crime. And that's actually okay. That's fine, as long as I turn out to be guilty. However, if I turn out to be innocent, then that's a problem. And one thing we have to demand from our law enforcement and from our politicians is that if tools like these are being used, we have to have a discussion about how these are being used and what's bad enough crime to be used for. And we must demand transparency. Transparency, for example, in the form of statistics. Statistics like, over the last year, this is how many citizens' computers we infected with law enforcement malware. This is how many of those turn out to be guilty, this is how many turn out to be innocent. And if the number of innocents seems to be fairly high, maybe we should change the laws. Maybe they shouldn't have the right to use tools like these. However, if most of these cases turn out to be useful and they actually catch serious criminals, then maybe that's a good trade-off. But we have no way of making that decision, knowing whether it's a good or bad trade-off, if we don't have transparency. So we must demand for transparency. And I'd also like to think that for those cases where law enforcement infects your system to investigate you for a serious crime and you turn out to be innocent, that they must tell you, that they must tell that we infected your system. And I would also like to think that they would come and say they're sorry. I think that would be fair. So we have examples of this, the infamous R2D2 Trojan used by the German Central Criminal Police, known also as Zapfis. The examples used by FBI, for example, the case against Freedom Hosting, which was a service hosting websites in the Tor hidden service, where FBI actually planted a drive-by exploit on those websites, which were targeting a vulnerability in Firefox browser, not a zero-day, but targeting the specific version of Firefox which was bundled with the Tor browser bundle. So it got a lot of hits from users. In that particular case, they were trying to get at people who were visiting Tor hidden service websites which contained child abuse material. And of course, it's very hard to defend anybody who visits child abuse websites, but we have always the slippery slope discussion coming with us when we start this train of using exploits to catch child predators. So then who are you going to use it against next? Governments also use malware for other purposes, like espionage. And of course, espionage is spying. And spying is collecting information. And information is, well, it's different now. It's virtual. Spying, like James Bond, used to be getting to where the information was. And this is what information used to look like. Information used to look like paper. So if you wanted to steal the information, you had to go where the information was physically to get at it. But today, of course, this is old school. Today, information is data. It's on our computers. It's on our networks. It can be reached remotely. And this paper revolution, how we've gotten rid of paper, really got me thinking around 2 months ago, because in Finland I live in the city of Espoo, which is right next to Helsinki, the capital. Which means every day when I drive to our office, I drive by this one building, which is the Nokia headquarters. And one day, 2 months ago when I drove by that building, the logos had been changed from Nokia to Microsoft. And I really felt sad about it. Really, like, shit, that's too bad. Now, Nokia did survive. Nokia still exists as a company, as a network equipment manufacturer and things like that, but they no longer sell mobile phones. Mobile phone business was sold to Microsoft, which included the headquarter building. Now, one thing about Finland, our number one export has always, for centuries, been forest products. Trees, paper, pulp, long time ago, tar, things like that. Paper, because we have lots of forests. For this brief window, for 15 years, our main export, our number one export was phones, mobile phones. And on the very same day, on that day when the logo changed on the wall of the Nokia headquarters, on the very same day, the second largest forest company in Finland announced that they're going to start building a $1 billion new factory in the middle of Finland to make pulp. So on the very same day when the mobile phone business disappeared, the paper business sort of came back. And that's frankly surprising because we no longer read our news from newspapers. You know this, we read it online. The need for paper has plummeted. We no longer buy books, we use Kindles. However, internet took away the need for paper, but it at the same time massively increased the demand for cardboard. Because we keep buying stuff online through the internet. We buy stuff from Amazon and everywhere else, and it's shipped to you in cardboard boxes. So that $1 billion factory in Finland is not going to make paper for newspapers, it's going to make cardboard. Because the need for cardboard has skyrocketed. So it's really weird how internet is changing things in ways you don't really expect. So the traditional spying for information on paper isn't valid anymore. That's why we are seeing the APTs, the targeted attacks, the espionage attacks. And I've actually listed espionage and surveillance here separate because surveillance is a little bit broader. You don't, for example, do spying on your own people. You do surveillance on your own people. And many countries are interested in doing surveillance on their own people, like in the case of Iran hacking DigiNotar to be able to do surveillance on their own citizens. Then we have governments generating technology or creating technology to do offensive sabotage with malware. And the best possible example of this is Stuxnet. And note, I'm not listing Stuxnet as an example of warfare, because Stuxnet wasn't an act of war. Why? Because the United States and Iran were not at war. So it was cyber sabotage. If there would have been a state of war between the United States and Iran when Stuxnet was launched, then yeah, absolutely it would have been an act of war. Now I think it was just an act of sabotage, targeted act of sabotage done by one government against another government. But warfare is in the books as well. All capable armies are building technology for future crises to use things like these to their benefit. And the number one benefit of offensive cyber capability for governments is deniability. The lack of attribution. Who did this? Where did this come from? And that's a great example on the difference between cyber arms race and nuclear arms race. In nuclear arms race, there's always attribution. You always know who's behind it. With cyber, you don't really know unless they confess. Like in the case of Stuxnet. US government, White House basically took the credit or took the blame for Stuxnet voluntarily. So which countries then are involved in this space? Well, we have strong indicators of at least these countries being directly linked to governmental malware use. Countries which are developing and using either backdoors or Trojans or malware of various kinds. So China was actually an easy choice to be there, put there as number one, because China was the first country we saw using governmental malware. The first governmental malware case I worked with was in 2003, so 11 years ago. We got a case from a large customer of ours from Northern Europe. This company was a defense manufacturer, a large defense manufacturer. And they would regularly send us malware samples because 2003 was still the golden age of email worms. So they would get hit by an email worms, as did anyone else. They were spreading. You could get infected and your computer sends the same email to everyone else. But then one day they sent us the sample and they were the only company who sent the sample, which was unusual. And the sample wasn't a binary, it was a Word document, which contained an exploit, which dropped a clean document and showed the clean document to the user, and it also dropped a backdoor. The archetype of an APT attack, exactly the kind of APT attack we still see today. And this was 11 years ago. And that attack very likely was launched from China. And we still keep seeing these attacks from China. And the scale is quite remarkable. So I have here a folder full of document files which we believe have been launched from China, which have been used as APT attacks or targeted attacks against their target. So every single one of these files is a document file, either a Word doc or an Excel or a PDF or PPT file, which drops a backdoor and shows a real document to the user so the user believes it's a real file. So lots of these files right here. This one is actually interesting. It's from Happy Distributions Inc. from Arizona, sent to Porn Star Supply Center. Debbie Brown. Now, all the samples I have here in this folder are from a feed from VirusTotal, so we actually have no idea who is being targeted with these particular document files. But the thing to take away from this is that they all look fairly real. That looks like a real document, like a real CV, someone looking for a job, except it contains a backdoor and drops, contains an exploit and drops a backdoor. Okay, here's a couple of months worth of these. There's quite a few of these actually. This maybe gives you some sense of scale on just how much APT attacks are being launched. I believe this was like 4 months of the stuff that we, with our technology, could identify as APT attacks. So, a lot. More than you would think. And this has led to the remarkable conclusion that the US government actually filed criminal charges earlier this year against military officers of another country for launching APT attacks against US targets. I've never heard of any country doing anything like this. That's what happened. US government filed charges against, was it 9 or 10 different people. One thing is for sure, these guys will never come to the United States for a holiday. You won't see them in Vegas, I'll tell you that. What about then Russians? Well, Russia has been active not as long as the Chinese, or if they've been active as long as the Chinese, we've missed it. Of course, there's always the possibility that we've missed some of this stuff, because we have missed some of this stuff for extended periods of time. Prime example, for example, Stuxnet and Flame, which we missed for several years. So we have to assume there's tons of stuff in the governmental activity which goes completely undetected. No one ever detects it. So some examples of what's been happening with the Russians is this latest case of Cosmic Duke, which is based on research we did recently, which links two interesting malware families with each other. There's a malware called Miniduke, originally found by the guys at Kaspersky, and another malware called Cosmo. And based on the research we did just a month ago, we were able to link these two families together conclusively, that they are actually coming from the same source and use shared code. So, geography lesson time. Here is Europe. Here we go. And this is Russia. I could only fit half of Russia on this slide. Seriously, it's pretty big. It's ridiculous how big it is. Now here, if you go down from Finland, we have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. Here is Ukraine. This is where the fighting is going on. The plane was dropped right about here. The MH71, the plane. You know what the plane I'm speaking about. Now, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine were part of Soviet Union. Finland wasn't. Finland has been independent since 1917, so 100 years. These other countries became independent from Soviet Union in the 1990s. So now, because of the crisis in Ukraine, the neighboring countries have been pretty worried about the situation over there, especially lots of talks about this in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, who are NATO countries. Belarus and Ukraine are not NATO countries. So why speak about Ukraine? Because Cosmic Duke goes through interesting ways of hiding itself and social engineering itself so that the targets will execute it. It's typically distributed in a binary, typically as a screensaver. So it's SCR, like a screensaver file under Windows. So you have that. That's Cosmic Duke, file.scr. The first thing they do to make it more tempting to click on it is that they actually change the icon of the file. And don't ask me why Windows allows you to change the icon of a screensaver file to anything you want, but they do. By default, that's the default non-icon for files which don't have an icon, but you can change it to anything you want, and in this case they change it to a PDF lookalike icon. Then they rename the file. They rename it to this. And this doesn't make much sense, but it's still missing one character which is added as the first character in the file name. And that character you can't actually see, because it's the Unicode right to left override character, which causes Windows to display the file name from right to left. This has been designed in Unicode for the languages like Arabic, which are written from right to left. So when you add the invisible character, the file name becomes this. And this is a real file used in an attack in Ukraine in March this year. rcs.Ukraine gas pipeline security report March 2014.pdf. It's not a PDF file. It's a screensaver, but it goddamn looks like a PDF file, doesn't it? It's not the only file. There was actually quite a few files they were sending. Some of them tried to look like JPEGs, some of them tried to look like Word docs. And when you would actually click on these files, they would drop Cosmic Duke binary, and then the PDF file would open up a real PDF file. The JPEG would open up a real JPEG file, and so on. So the Cosmic Duke attribution has also been interesting, because there's quite a bit of remnants inside the code which allows us to identify, for example, the name of the project as named by the creators of Cosmic Duke. They call it BotGen Studio. And you can also find project names like Nitro and Nemesis, and nicknames or initials like KSK and SVA. We believe these are the people who actually were doing the coding for Cosmic Duke. Another recent case from Russia, and about Cosmic Duke, if you want to read all the details, we published a technical report on it last month, which you can download from our blog. If you just Google for Cosmo with a twist of Mini Duke, you'll find it. But another case from Russia with recent interesting developments is the one called Havex, also known as energetic beer if you use the nomenclature of CrowdStrike. Havex is interesting. It's an information gathering tool, very similar in functionality to Cosmic Duke, although it's not related, but they both gather information. But what makes it unusual is that when it's doing network scanning, it specifically scans for OPC servers. This is from the logs, internal debug logs found inside the binary of Havex. And OPC is an abbreviation, or it used to be an abbreviation for OLE, for process control. So it's OLE as is the old Windows standard or Microsoft standard. Nowadays it's no longer an abbreviation, it's just the brand name. OPC means factory control. So it's actually scanning for ICS gear. It doesn't actually do anything with that capability. It just scans for them. So we don't really know what the reason for doing this is. One guess could be that it's some sort of fingerprinting. It's trying to find the right facility, and then it maybe does something. But we don't actually know. Stuxnet did something similar when it tried to find the right facility, the Natanz facility inside Iran. It fingerprinted the layout of the high-frequency power converters used by the Iranians. But here it's actually very unclear to us whether this is fingerprinting or something completely different. But it is unusual in the sense that it is scanning for OPC servers. And what's even more interesting is the way HAVEX was distributed. They weren't emailing, well, actually they were also emailing it around, but the most clever way of distributing it is that they hacked 4 different ICS vendors, so factory gear vendors, infected the original downloads of their software on their official website. And that's pretty nasty. Like, you are downloading the latest patches for your factory gear from the website of the manufacturer, and that download is infected. So that's a watering hole attack, very narrow watering hole attack. They're only going to hit the targets you're interested in and no one else. And the last Russian case I'll touch upon is the case which started in 2008 from agent.bdz and continued all the way to today with related malware Turla, Snake, Ouroboros. An agent.bdz case was an interesting case from 2008. I actually named agent.bdz. It's not a very good name, but at the time it didn't feel like an important malware in any case. But we did get the initial sample of this malware from the military network of a European NATO country. Later on, it was revealed that the same malware was found from quite a few other NATO countries' military networks. And it was capable of spreading on USB sticks and collecting information from air-gapped networks. So it would make mirror structures of the document folders on the infected computers and put copies of those on every single USB stick in the organization. And then one of those USB sticks would exit the organization. For example, someone takes a USB stick home and plugs it into a computer which is connected to the internet, then it's going to send out the network structure or the folder structure of every single computer it has infected inside the air-gapped network. Fairly clever attack. Now, if you look at how we can claim that this malware from 2008 is related to this other malware from 2014, there are some similarities. For example, the internal debug messages for like log handling are exactly the same in agent.bdz and in Turla. There are similarities, either copying or recycling of source code, or it's the same authors. The authors even have nicely left their initials or nicknames inside the code or inside some of the systems that have been forensically analyzed. So there's a guy called Gil G and a guy called Vlad who have been handling this case or who are behind the case, at least these two guys. So that brings us to factory automation. When Stuxnet was found in 2010, everybody was assuming that we will now see tons of copycats. And we didn't. Stuxnet remains the only malware that even tries to infect these, that tries to infect PLCs. HAVEX isn't doing that, neither is anyone else. If there are copycats of Stuxnet out there, we haven't found them. And that is, frankly, surprising. Modifying Stuxnet, obviously it isn't easy, but it would be doable. And if somebody's done it, they haven't been caught. And if somebody just recycled the ideas behind Stuxnet, the idea of infecting Windows computers which are used to program these devices and then reprogram them from those machines, if somebody's done that, they haven't been caught. So I guess that's the good news. I mean, Stuxnet didn't start a massive onslaught of ICS infectors. Simply hasn't become a real problem. The time before Stuxnet and time after Stuxnet are different. It is a watershed moment in the history of malware. It was very complicated project. It was very, very well executed. It used multiple different zero-day exploits at the same time, infected successfully PLC gear, was able to do that despite the fact that all these protocols are undocumented. So a successful operation. And the best and the definite write-up on Stuxnet was released less than a year ago by Ralph Langner from Langner Associates in Germany. So if you're interested in the full story on every single Stuxnet version, including the early versions, which were found much later, download this paper. It includes very interesting discussion about the Stuxnet attacks, which never really made the news. When people talk about how Stuxnet started destroying centrifuges, they talk about how they were spinning the centrifuges at wrong speeds, which is true. Stuxnet did that, but only one version. There are other versions which tried to destroy the centrifuges, not by spinning them, but by increasing the pressure. Increasing the pressure and preventing overflow from exiting from the centrifuge. They did that as well. It's all in the white paper released by Ralph last year. And it also includes very interesting forensic analysis of the gear the Iranians use inside Natanz and other nuclear facilities, mostly based on open source photos which have been taken during visits to these facilities. So Ralph is going through the photos and identifying what kind of gear they use. I got an email from a guy who, well, he wasn't working at Natanz, he was working here. He was working at the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran. Some of you might remember this case, happened 2 years ago. Out of the blue, I got an email from this guy who I'd never heard of, and he tells me that they have new problems with new malware. Not Stuxnet, something different. And then he writes this most bizarre thing to me, which is that the computers inside the organization are playing music in the middle of the night. In particular, playing Thunderstruck by AC/DC. Now, to this day, we don't really know whether this actually happened or not. I did exchange a bunch of emails with this guy. The emails were really coming from the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran. Then the emails stopped like that. But it's possible it happened. It's possible that the attacker, who most likely was the same attacker as was behind Stuxnet, so that would be your government, American government, or maybe the Israeli government, maybe they had launched an attack against this organization. Maybe they had already gathered everything they wanted. Maybe they had no problem in becoming getting themselves discovered. In fact, in many ways, this could be seen as mind games. If you read Ralph Langner's, if you read the book called Confront and Conceal by one of the New York Times editors, which was the book that actually made the original claim that Stuxnet was written by US government, one of the stories they have in there is that what US government wanted to do with the attack was to make the Iranians feel stupid, make them feel like that they can't keep their machines operating. And it worked. Iranians, for example, ended up firing lots of engineers because they couldn't keep the centrifuges operating. And the engineers weren't doing anything wrong. They were being sabotaged. So if you think about that angle and think about this AC/DC theory, well, if you want to let a whole organization know that your IT security guys can't defend you, well, this would do it. Like every single one would know that our IT guys can't keep the malware out of here because our computers are playing AC/DC. So maybe it actually happened. We don't know. Interestingly, though, one malware which is related to Stuxnet called Gauss, which is part of the Operation Olympic malware, it encrypts its network traffic with a 16-bit XOR operation, and the encryption key it uses is ACDC, which could be a coincidence. but we don't know. So, we've seen other malware from US government as well. Flame is a great example because Flame did the remarkable trick of distributing itself through the Microsoft update system, which is impossible unless your binaries have been signed by Microsoft. The trick was that their binaries were signed by Microsoft, or not really by Microsoft, they were signed by a rogue code signing certificate, generation of which was a remarkable feat. I'm not a cryptographer myself, but my cryptographer friends keep telling me about how that's impossible, or how it's almost impossible, or how it would require very small time windows and supercomputers to do it. But they did it. And when we added detection for Flame, for the first time ever, I got actually people telling me on Twitter that we're helping the terrorists by blocking malware done by US government, which is a really bizarre claim, but yeah, I guess so. What about the rest of the world? Well, North Korea has its own capability. It's not really very well understood or documented, and there are various anecdotes in public press about their units of thousands of hackers who do hacking from Chinese IP exit nodes. But we do know much more about the so-called outsourced activities. And these are countries which don't have the capability of producing malware by themselves, so they go and buy it from outside sources. The two best known examples are the Finfisher governmental malware suite done by a company called Gamma, and the RCS remote control system, or the Da Vinci system, done by a company called Hacking Team. And this Gamma case is very timely because yesterday someone started leaking tons of internal information from Gamma Group, posting to Twitter under the name Gamma Group PR, posting links to their internal training documents, some of their source code, and their price lists, internal price lists, which are very interesting because they, for example, go through their exploit pricing. So when you buy the FinFly exploit kit, which is part of the Finfisher suite, it comes with 3 zero-day exploits targeting Word, Excel, and PowerPoint with a warranty for 6 months, including 1 replacement. So if one of them gets burned, so it's no longer 0-day, you get a new 0-day. The price list, the internal price list, also has references to 2 companies which actually sell 0 days, Wupen and Dreamlab. Wupen has already denied on Twitter that they aren't selling to Gamma, but Wupen is mentioned multiple times in these leaked documents, including in the customer FAQ. So I don't really know who's telling the truth. The other company, Gamma is actually run by a guy called Martin Münch, which some of you might know or remember indirectly because he used to be the guy involved or behind Backtrack Linux. He's no longer involved with it. He found much more lucrative business in actually selling tools like these to governments around the world. And one of the references from the documents, the internal documents, are interesting. So for example, here's a use case where a foreign intelligence agency deployed the FinFly ISP tool with the main internet service provider of their country. It was combined with FinFly Web to remotely infect targets that visited government offensive websites. It doesn't sound very democratic to me, does it? So if you visit a website which is offensive to your government, you get infected with drive-by download forced into your network traffic by the government's ISP with Western technology sold by European companies. This is also from the leaks from yesterday. FinFly or Finfisher suite also has mobile versions, and they support almost everything you would think they would support, including iPhone, except they don't support Windows Phone. So if you're running a Lumia, you're safe. And we have seen these tools, both hacking teams, RCS as Gamma's Finfisher, in countries around the world, countries which don't have the technical capabilities of developing themselves. Some of these countries have also used even cheaper options, tools like Black Shades or Dark Comet or Extreme Rat, and some of these are actually fairly accessible. But let me play you a 2-minute ad video
today.
from hacking team.
Sensitive data is transmitted over encrypted channels. Often the information you want is not transmitted at all. Your target may be outside your monitoring domain. Is passive monitoring enough? You need more. You want to look through your target's eyes. You have to hack your target. You have to hit many different platforms. You have to overcome encryption and capture relevant data. Being stealth and untraceable. Deployed all over your country. Exactly what we do. Remote Control System Da Vinci. The hacking suite.
So it must be tempting for up-and-coming governments to buy into tools like slick tools like these, whether it's right, whether it's ethical, whether it's democratic, probably not. And some of these governments indeed go for even cheaper options. This is actually a screenshot I borrowed from research done by the Citizen Lab from Toronto and ICSI. Someone claiming to be from Al Jazeera sending information about human rights violations in Bahrain and torture in Bahrain. And of course, the attachment is the actual Trojan. Black Shades was also used by some of these smaller governments. This operation was actually taken down by law enforcement roughly 2 months ago. These guys had been operating for several years selling a simple remote control Trojan for $50. So you have to be a pretty cheap government to go with a solution like this. Now, not everybody has to do that. So the more developed countries develop their own. And we know a little bit about the elite hacking units inside NSA or GCHQ. Most of these have we learned from the Snowden leaks. So we know there's units like TAO or NAC or JTRIG inside UK and USA intelligence agencies. But it's not, of course, just the United States. It's the whole combination of these exchangers of information. So, of course, USA works very closely with the Five Eyes, the English language world. USA, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And then there's the Nine Eyes, which is Five Eyes plus Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, and France. Which is a bit surprising because you would think countries like that if Denmark and Norway are there, how come Sweden isn't there? And the answer is Sweden is not a NATO country. But Sweden is good enough to make it to the 14 Eyes, which is Nine Eyes plus Sweden, Germany, Belgium, Italy, and Spain. Actually, Sweden is the only non-NATO country on the list. And while we speak about Sweden, it's good to know that they actually have some level of malware capability by themselves. And you wouldn't really think that as the first thing off the bat, because it is very neutral, very democratic, peaceful country. But if you look at the Snowden leaks, you'll see that they are discussing malware topics in meetings together with the NSA, and they are running the so-called quantum trilateral exploit network together with the GCHQ and the NSA. And while we are speaking about Sweden, let me just state it for the record that Peter Sunde doesn't belong in a jail. Peter Sunde is right now in Sweden in jail called Västervik Norra. And he's one of the guys behind Pirate Bay. And this guy doesn't belong to a jail. He should be freed immediately. Free Peter Sunde. So what is this quantum capability that the Swedish FRA is running together with the US and UK counterparts? Well, it's their drive-by exploit kit. Very similar in functionality to the criminal exploit kits like Black Hole. The difference is that it's done by a government. And the difference is that when you visit a website which has been equipped with a traditional exploit kit, it's going to infect everybody who visits it. With Quantum, it's only going to infect the targets they're interested in. And the website itself hasn't been hacked at all. Instead, this is done by having access to the trunk internet connection lines, and identifying the target's requests for a web page when they visit the website. And the identification is done based, for example, on double-click cookies on the computer. And then they send a reply to your GET request, and they send it faster and quicker than the real site does, so it reaches you first. And the page that you see, the page that reaches you first, contains an exploit, and you're the only one getting it. So how do you defend against an attack like that? Well, that's a great question. It really isn't easy, defending against attacks like this. So you can say exactly the same thing about many of the other things we've learned from the Snowden leaks regarding US capability, like being able to infect the flash BIOSes of hard drives. So even though you reformat, low-level format your hard drive, when you reinstall operating system, you're infected again. How do you defend against that? Very good questions. And one way of monitoring all this happening is seeing where the skills are gathered from. And that's fairly easy to do. All you have to do is go to recruitment websites and see how the governments and the defense contractors are recruiting people with skills like this. So this is, I took this screenshot today. This is Raytheon writing that they're looking for people to work in Maryland with top secret clearance. We need offensive CNO developers, that's computer network operations developers, to focus on development of new tools and capabilities. You need 5 to 8 years of experience working with US government CNO missions to get this job. Here's CSC, who's looking for a candidate to discover and create exploitable weaknesses and zero-day vulnerabilities in commercial and non-commercial technologies. Experience with Windows and Linux required. Candidate must also be able to create all forms of advanced offensive cyberspace capabilities. So there's two things here. First of all, this is happening. Second of all, this is an OPSEC failure, isn't it? You can just see which companies are looking for skills like this. Here's General Dynamics looking for people to write exploits for Android, BlackBerry, iPhones, and iPads. And here's Northrop Grumman looking for people to join this exciting and fast-paced research and development project which will plan, execute, and assess an offensive cyberspace operation. Really? Oh, yes. So I went and looked at the Geneva Convention to get my head straight around all of this. The Geneva Convention, the one that we passed after the Second World War, sets the rules of law regarding war. That Geneva Convention, for example, tells you that you're not supposed to bomb hospitals or churches. And it also defines what's a legitimate target. And funnily enough, the way I read it, during times of crisis, we would be a legitimate target. An antivirus company would be a legitimate target for bombing, for example, during time of war. That's remarkable. And I'll tell you, when I joined this company in 1991 to analyze viruses spreading on floppy disks, I wasn't really expecting it to come to this. But that's what's happened. That's where we are today. Thank you very much.